Hello, thank you for this opportunity to tell my story. I appreciate the effort they've given, and continue to give on this life-altering subject. Thank you for what you stand for, and you know what we go through. Understanding and the ability to hear other people tell their encounters. This is so important because of my current position. I'm not at liberty for you to disclose my full name. Just call me Pete. I'm 64 years old and Aboriginal. My mother was Manitoba Saulteaux Cree, pronounced Salto. I grew up in southeastern British Columbia, in the East Kootenays, and hunted and fished. I would rather hold a rod than a rifle. I spent most of my life in the bush year-round, just not in hunting season. Paying attention to herd movements. Relative to any season, shed hunting, and looking for winter. Kill in the spring of the year, and watching to my dismay the decimation of ungulates by wolves. Oh, I'm sure we both know what I'm talking about. They're listening to a bunch of grant-slurping hippies tell me about the benefits of a non-regulated wolf population. The mule deer population seemed to have taken the hardest hit. First, I couldn't believe how quickly the mule deer numbers tumbled. Right where I'm standing, exact same thing. I've been monitoring this entire strip. This whole valley system for about 12 years now with thousands of dollars of cameras, and I have watched the wolves absolutely explode, and annihilate everything. Same deal across miles of British Columbia. Anyway, I have hunted and fished in every drainage within 100 miles of my hometown, and a number of areas throughout North America. I literally have thousands of days and hundreds of nights in the Rocky Mountains. Like all serious hunters, we've had our moments with predators. I've been through 2 ugly grizzly encounters, and 1 cat, up to no good, that I had to shoot, while elk hunting. Each instance scared the living crap out of me. Each one was ever so fast that when it was over, you had to relieve and rethink it for me. Each instance created an adrenaline shake through my entire body. It's important to state this to what I'm about to say, in perspective, the difference between the efforts of a bad predator encounter, and what I believe is a Sasquatch presence on 2 Sasquatch encounters. I have had encounters yet never seen one. The encounters are in 3 different locations. I won't go into great detail of each encounter, just enough to give the setting what took place. What I want to share is the ability of these beings to project feelings into you. The first is an area that had a low ridge about 4,000 feet, at an old logging road landing. You could see across the logged-off area for about 200 yards, and a 180-degree arcade at the edge of the clearing. A fairly mature spruce forest stood erect. What we would call the black timber. A great place for elk. We went back to this area 5 times over the course of an elk season. To bugle, call, or cow call elk. We are successful with 1, sometimes 3 different bulls responding. Every time within 1 or 2 responding bulls, there would be a loud knock, like a baseball bat hitting a dead snag. You could tell that the noise of the loud knock was between us, and then the knocking would continue from 2 to 3 different locations within the tall black timber. The bulls would immediately become silent. After a number of these, this would stop. This is before I ever heard anything about tree knocking. Twice my partner and I crossed into the black timber and I found nothing but moss and trees. What we did find was that the moment we went into the big timber, we were both overcome with a sense of being watched. We were about 150 yards apart. The further we went in the woods, the worse it got. It changed from being watched to leave. It was not a sense of intense fear of death, but that of danger and a clear feeling of leave. It was overwhelming. We both felt the same way. I knew that we did because our distance apart was rapidly closing. When we are a few yards apart, and I looked at my partner's face, no words needed to be said. We were not panicked or ready to run, but an intense urge feeling to leave. I looked at him and nodded. He motioned with his hand to the direction of the landing, and we pulled back. There was strangeness about it, a heaviness like we were retreating. That is the best way to describe it. When we talked about this back at the landing, we knew then, as we do now, the words describing the overpowered feeling are difficult to find. The second encounter was in a creek bottom, about an hour after dark, in late September. We'd built a good fire at a camp that was about 15 yards from the creek. 5 of us were sitting around talking about the day's hunt. It was our last night and we were having a few road pops. The few crude jokes laughing, there was a momentary lull in our antics, when directly across the creek from us, a loud, and I mean a loud shriek scream, "Let go!" It was so close, too close. Nobody moved or said anything. Nobody had ever heard anything like it. Everyone looked at each other like, does anybody have any ideas to or what that was? The feeling was not like the tree knock area. This seemed angry. It was strange. It was only talked about for a few brief moments, then avoided. It was amazing to see 5 grown men quickly grab the rifles, chamber around without a word, and stare in the darkness. No one wanting to show fear. All good seasoned hunters. The evening didn't last much longer. First thing in the morning after poor sleep we all pulled out. There was no day hunt. No one wanted to hunt there. You see, it wasn't just the scream, it was the intense feeling of fear that accompanied the scream. The third encounter was about 100 yards from the creek bottom. Again with my lifelong hunting partner during elk season. It had been a fairly warm day, and we were confident that the elk were after that cool creek bottom. It was early evening and there was a low round ridge between us and the creek. Just enough to give us cover from prying eyes. Because we're so close to the creek, I turned 180 degrees from the creek and bugled in the opposite direction. Immediately, and I mean immediately at the end of my bugle, from the creek bottom, came a long bellowing roar, like nothing I, or he had ever heard. There was such ferocity and strength in the way that it overwhelmed us, you could feel it inside your body. This was more than angry, this struck such a deep fear, I don't like to admit it. I've only been afraid a few times in my life, but never have I felt anything like this. I threw up my .338 and told myself, get ready. My partner threw up his rifle and we waited. Safety's off, both of us struggling with the thought of what the hell was that, and trying to shake the fear off. Then there is the loud crash of something. Then nothing, just silence. I'm a confident person, I have confidence in my rifle, but not that day. I've taken an 8'2" grizzly, and many elk with that rifle, but I knew inside that it would not be adequate for whatever that was just 100 yards away. Wow, that's pretty intense. That's a .338, which is basically a small rocket launcher when it comes to rifles in North American rifles. So to feel that that wasn't adequate at something 100 yards away, that's pretty intimidating. What I find important about these three events is that in each circumstance there is a deep feeling inside, with each encounter a feeling that has never left me. For all of us, when we encounter something, anything of that magnitude, we enjoy sharing the event. Not so when it comes to this. It's like when you have met something that has outclassed you, or is superior to you. You've been put in your place, outmatched. Also, you're not acceptable to the space of their presence. You tend to become quiet, or humbled by the experience. So when you have to tell your story and someone else mocks you, it hits in a different way. Nobody boasts of any encounter. It is a sobering event, when I listen to the stories from hunters. It's not the glittering high five for an awesome bull or a massive buck, but the story of, I've seen something that scared the hell out of me. Humbled me, got me inside. It's not the elusiveness, size or strength of the being that is worrisome and impressive that is to be respected, but their ability to project into your very soul. This, I believe, is the point. That's not what you have seen or heard but affects you so much, but how it got inside of you. It cannot be explained properly. Only when you speak with someone who has had an experience can it be understood. I never want to see one, or feel the presence again. In closing, I've tried to go back and hunt these three areas. It doesn't work when I grabbed my pistol and rifle, and when I did try to go back into one of these areas, I didn't make it too far, and I would turn around as the intense feelings came back. I have no problem going where I had the grizzly challenges, or my cougar problem in hunting, but not in the above mentioned areas. For me, those areas are taboo. Not so much from what happened, but what took place inside of me. I'll never hunt those areas again. Yes, thank you, I was able to get this out of me. The stories I have listened to on your YouTube site have allowed me to open up. These incidents took place over the course of my hunting life. I've tried a few times to bring the subject up to few individuals. The result was the start of the instant mockery. Since then I've never discussed this with anyone, not even my own children. I've now spoken to them about this. Your platform has made this possible for me to open up again. Thank you for the bastards that try to give you a hard time. I like the way that you tell them to piss off. I hope this doesn't become a short novel. Thoughts from some of your videos. Number 1, you mentioned that you've been questioned as to why both hunters tend to have more encounters than anyone else. As a bow hunter, you know we hunt different terrain. If we can see 50 yards we're happy, so we tend to be in the thick growth. Our kills are closer, much like any predator, so we tend to run into the predators up close and personal. Rifle hunting, we tend to be a more open country, we're the only animal that can long-range kill. To take advantage of this, as rifles, we are in areas more easily spotted, or seen. Number 2, I was keenly involved in the martial arts for a number of years. One of the instructors I spent time with was a South Korean, who was a former instructor with the Special Forces. We talked a lot about the projection of thought. I've applied this to hunting. He would say that in order to take out a sanctuary, or guard, when you spot them from a distance, never look directly at them, look at a branch above their head, or at the ground beneath their feet. If you look directly at them regardless of the time of day, or night, their subconscious will automatically become more aware. Your thoughts have been projected. It works great on animals as well. Maybe this is what these beings can do at a greater level than us. Number 3, tree knocking and hitting two sticks together. When I was a little kid, maybe 10 years old, I was playing at my grandmother's house. She was Cree. I was banging two sticks together. She stopped me, and told me, "Come and listen." She said this is very dangerous, it can scare off danger, they can bring the beast of the forest. So never do that unless you have to, because the hairy beast will come and get you, and we will never see you again. I've seen your YouTube of the people who said the beings were banging sticks together outside their tent, and it made me think of my grandmother's warning. Also, my grandmother's people now know and accept that these beings exist. They are known to my people as Chyanka or sometimes Whitaker. I love the channel and appreciate the work you do very much. I'd like to remain anonymous, but I'm a junior hockey player from California. I won't say much more than that because that already narrows it down a whole lot. I'm a lifelong outdoorsman, an average shooter, and a fly fisherman who is no stranger to this. I have lived in the Sierra Nevadas my whole life. I grew up, and my grandfather told me about Sasquatch. While mostly a fantasy as a younger kid, it became more of a reality over time because you grow up and want to believe things like Santa, the Tooth Fairy, and Sasquatch. Well, it turns out one of them is very real. This season I played in Ontario. We went on a camping trip with the team for a form of team bonding. The camp was out of season and was in some sort of the most dense forest I've ever been in. It was hours away from our town and was on its own small lake which had an 11-kilometer loop around it. Our coach decided we all had to take a walk around the lake to get us moving and having a good time. And we just certainly did. I was soaking up every minute of the good fishing, even catching my first pike and muskie. Then I ended with the boys all enjoying a massive fire right on the shoreline of the beach. Later on, after the jokes had worn off, everyone went to the one-door cabin which sat about 200 yards back in the woods. I felt odd just leaving the fire there, so I decided to take a 5-gallon bucket and douse the fire, as it is normal practice here in California. It was just me and another teammate from Canada at this point. I would like to add that this was early September and the loons were having a real good time along with the crickets. I grabbed the water bucket and made my way down to the water, now completely backlit from the large fire. This is when I had noticed all the loons had gone completely dead quiet, and so did the crickets. It got real creepy real fast. So much that I have goosebumps writing about it now. It was such a dark night that the lake and the pine made a single pitch black horizon, barely visible against the sky. This was very disorienting. Anyways, about my second or third bucket of water, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I tried to stare out into the blackness. Because my sixth sense kicked in overdrive, I wanted to run right on the spot, and drop the bucket. That's about when I heard the loud howl coming from the other side of the lake, about where we'd hiked earlier that day. It was on key with the loon almost impersonating a little bit very close to the Ohio recordings. The Bigfoot wheeling, but was higher pitch, almost a shriek. The scariest part was how it sounded from across the large lake. It was off into the timber a ways, and was 8 times louder than any animal I'd ever heard in the forest before. I've heard elk, mountain lions, bobcats, and more. That's when my teammate from Canada began to freak out, and grabbed the water buckets and finished. Hastily every time we go down to the lake backlit by the dying fire, a howl would come across the water as electrifying the air. It was so much to handle that we dusted the fire and sprinted up the hill until we were in the cabins. Out of breath, I didn't say anything when I went into the cabin, but I ended up explaining what happened to my teammates, who lived on the reservation. He got very serious. We discussed it and we decided we should go out on the porch of the cabin and sit, until we heard something. As he had never actually had a sighting, but knew many people who had seen one before. Anyone can try and chalk up as a prank or a hoax. Everyone on the trip was in the cabin, and it was one door in one door out. We're the only ones outside. My teammate, who was native, explained that sightings happen on his reserve all the time, and the voices will often come out of the woods. I was admittedly a little freaked out by this, but I listened. He then explained that making any noise in the forest long after dark was highly discouraged among his elders, and disrespectful, so that's what we started doing. The forest has started back up with regular crickets and loons, and I was kind of questioning what I had heard. Already totally doubting it would happen again, he let off about 3 whistles and the forest went dead. Quiet again. This is when the howl I had heard earlier came back and sounded even closer than before. I'll never forget the look on his face when he heard it. It was absolute shock. All the more reason, I was now shitting a brick. This continued and he began to actually go back and forth with the howl. He would clap, scream, or whistle, and the long drawn-out shriek would respond. This went on until the howl simply stopped responding. We sat on the porch for a while longer and talked. We heard snapping tree limbs only about 20 yards away from us. It was something big. The next part is super hard for me to explain. But basically we sat there and a voice so loud, and so deep mumbled out at us from under the trees. It started in a low growl and ended in something saying hey. It was so deep, I felt it in my chest, as if it was a bomb going off. To this day is the biggest oh my god moment of my life, and I'll never forget it, ever. My teammates now are frozen. I came out of my shock. I had tears running down my face, and didn't even know it. It must have been only a few seconds, but the panic I had felt was so intoxicating. I couldn't believe it. My adrenaline was higher than ever, like after a fist fight. I couldn't stop shaking. When we went back inside, everyone was in the cabin shooting the shit, and they made fun of us because my Toronto teammate who was with me by the lake. I had told everyone about the howls. Everything died down in the cabin and the guys began to fall asleep slowly. While I was still in shock and texting my mom, who sent me the link to the Ontario Parks and Recreation's website, which had an article that had pretty much detailed about Sasquatch openly existing. A few moments later my goalie started knocking on the wall of the cabin as a joke. That's when my teammate who lived on the reserve sat right up and told him as serious as I've ever seen anyone. Don't knock on that wall because you won't like what knocks back. That's when we told everyone that we really had experienced something, and it wasn't really a joke at all. This is a longer email for sure, and probably messily written, but I had to stomp it out. I'm a stronger person. I don't have much emotional trauma after this, but it was eye-opening. I now check my missing persons report and study every area before camping or fishing. These creatures are a fact of life, like anything, and I get laughed at, but just the other day on a camping trip, my friend heard footsteps outside her tent and decided to go sleep in the car. As for any of the other hockey players, keep your eyes peeled on those early morning bus trips through the dark roads and the pine stands. You might see something. I hope this email makes it. If not, that's okay too. I put it up because I wanted to share. Stay vigilant, walk lightly, and carry a big gun. My name is Rich Williams. Thanks Rich for coming forward using your name. Now a short background to myself. I am 58 years old and was raised on a cattle ranch, third-generation cowboy riding horses, and working cattle every day. I was raised living and working in the outdoors. The person gets to know tracks and signs as well, watching animals, their daily habits. I'm also a Navy veteran. I was stationed in Japan for 4 years during the Iran conflict. I was raised a hunter and fisherman and still am to this day. I mostly hunt deer, elk, and black bear. My encounter happened in the 2007 hunting season in Washington State. I was hunting black bear with my friend Mike. We're south of the Yakima Nation and north of Golden Dale, approximately 5 miles west of Status Pass, below Mount Adams area. We had an early start and split up to cover more country. We also had two-way radios in case we needed each other. I'd hunted all day, lots of sign but no bears. As it was getting late, I started back to my truck, which is at least a mile away. About halfway back I heard this crazy scream/howl, that I'd never heard before, but I thought it had to be a bear. I got excited and set up ready for the shot. The screams sound like they're coming from about 50 yards away, due west to my location. I was using a stump setup, and Elise tend to these screams for about what seemed like forever. But in reality it's probably 4 or 5 minutes. Then they started to sound like they were moving away. This whole time I was thinking it was the craziest scream I've ever heard. Incredibly loud, and also sounded like the trees were breaking. As the sound was fading, I tried to mimic it. When I did, the screams came back louder and it sounded pissed off. I'm imitated again. This time another scream erupted from approximately 50 yards due north. So now two are screaming at me. I called Mike on his radio and told him to get his ass to where I was, telling him there was multiple bears here. He gave me crap saying BS. He showed up. I waved him to where I was just as two screams happened again. He ran up and got his rifle ready. His first response was, "What the hell was that?" I said, "I don't think it's bears. But I've never heard that before, or heard two bears screaming so close to each other." Mike said, "You scream again," so I did, but here's where it really gets scary. All of a sudden now 4 screams happen, the 2 original ones, but 2 more, 150 yards east and 150 yards south. We felt completely surrounded. It made us both very uneasy. After a little while of screaming and limbs breaking, we both walked back to my pickup, not really talking but trying to laugh it off. When we got back to the truck it was dark. We were unloading our gear using the cab light and build lights on our ball caps. Mike jokingly asked me to mimic the scream one more time. I did. Instantly, from what sounded like 10 feet away, the loudest scream came from the pitch dark. It scared both of us so bad we literally threw our stuff in and jumped in the truck and hauled ass back to camp. Upon arriving we loaded up and got up the mountain without asking if we wanted to do any hunting anymore. Hunting, it scared me to the bone. Mike and I have never hunted in that area or together ever again. I still hunt but very edgy and extremely alert. I told this story to my brother. His reply was not ever to repeat it. I said, BS, I'm always going to look over my shoulder and feel very uncomfortable like something is watching me now. But I refuse to quit going. I love the woods and hunting. Thank you again for all you do. Take care and keep up the work. Sincerely, Rich Williams.